Thanks, Peter. Hi, everyone. My name's Kate Copping and I'm an MAV board member and I'm Vice President as well. I'm also a member of the Conference Committee and the moderator for this keynote panel. My role will be to moderate the panel and assist with the Q&A via the chat feature. Some of your questions might be answered by panel members throughout the session, and we're hoping to get to some of the other questions at the end of the session too. If you have any technical issues, please check your confirmation email for troubleshooting and who to contact for support. But before I introduce the panel, I'd like to thank the Australian Maths Trust for supporting this keynote today. So let's begin. This is room 2, and our topic for the panel today is ways to organise your classroom to cater for all students in mathematics lessons. And to talk about this panel today, our keynote panel members are Swada. Swada has worked as a generalist primary classroom teacher across all levels for the past 19 years, with the previous 4 years as a mathematics specialist at Turak Primary School and Altona Green Primary School. During this time, she's had an opportunity to further develop her teaching, learning and leadership practices in the areas of mathematics with support through the Deep Primary Mathematical and Science Specialist Initiative and the MAV Collaborative. In her leadership capacity in school, she looks to engage with teachers and to develop their capacity in teaching mathematics through creating a shared vision of what we want our students to know, be and do as mathematicians. She's passionate about inspiring students to develop a growth mindset in mathematics through engaging them with tasks that challenge their thinking, whilst allowing them to develop their own toolkit to use during problem solving. In her practice, mathematics is seen as fun, an engaging learning experience where every child is scaffolded and supported to reach their potential, and that it's not about being the fastest or knowing the answer the right way. Our second panel member is Mark. Mark has been involved in primary school education in the Western region of Melbourne for 33 years. Early in his career, he developed the household maths and maths in sport programs that differentiated the curriculum and engaged students in mathematical practices that were part of their lives. Mark has always been involved in mathematics leadership in some way throughout his career and has presented at several MAV conferences, often focusing on the use of learning technologies in mathematics, such as robotics and Google Suite applications. As Mark moved out of a full-time classroom teaching and into a permanent mathematics leadership role over the last 8 years, he spent several years at his current school developing an extension program for the high-achieving students, while concurrently developing teacher efficacy in differentiating for a wider range of students, eventually making extension a natural, accessible part of the curriculum at his school. He's been a member of the MAV Student Activities Committee, mainly through his leadership role in organising and hosting a student-led Grade 6 Maths Game Day and being a regular state-level judge for MAV's Maths Talent Quest, an investigation-based competition in which his school has been a successful participant representing the Western region through his guidance. Mark is currently a lead member of a cohort of schools involved in the ACER project developed by Drs. Joanne Mulligan and Mike Mitchell-Moore, exploring pattern and structure in the junior years. The third member of our panel is Michelle. Michelle is a teaching associate within the Faculty of Education at Monash. Over the past 28 years, she has worked in a wide variety of primary school teaching and leadership roles, with a particular focus on numeracy and mathematics skills development. She now works with teachers as a consultant in both government and private schools with undergraduate students to help them prepare for the teaching profession. Michelle's qualifications include 2 Master of Education degrees, specialising in early years numeracy and instructional leadership, postgraduate certificate in educational studies for the IB PYP program, and a postgraduate certificate in education research, certificate in maths intervention, the EMU program, and a Bachelor of Education Primary and a Diploma of Teaching Primary. Peter is the next member of the panel. Peter has had a career that combines research into task design with the development of teacher support resources and classroom trialling. He was author of The Shape of the Australian Mathematics Curriculum, a paper commissioned by the National Curriculum Board to lay the foundation of the Australian curriculum. Subsequently, he was appointed the lead writer for the development phases of the curriculum and has supported ongoing development of the documents, including consulting on the review conducted in 2015. He was also the author of the Australian Educational Review publication, Teaching Mathematics Using Research-Informed Strategies, that has now been downloaded over 210,000 times from the ACER website. Peter was editor for 7 years and for 3 years chief editor of the prestigious Journal for Mathematics Teacher Education, published by Springer. He was also editor of the Mathematics Education Research Journal, published by Springer. He has an extensive list of publications as books, chapters, journal articles, and conference publications. And the final member of the panel is myself, Kate. I began my career as a primary school teacher and have taught all levels from foundation to year 6 in schools in Victoria, New South Wales, and the United States. And while teaching in Victoria, I've been a mathematics leader and leading teacher and an innovations and excellence cluster leader. I've provided mathematics professional development for teachers through ACER, the Department of Education, and Bastow. And I've worked with individual schools as maths consultant and provided professional development training sessions. I've worked in teacher education at the Graduate School of Education at Melbourne since 2008 as a teaching fellow and clinical specialist supporting teacher candidates whilst on placement and as a lecturer in primary mathematics. I'm currently a PhD candidate and my research involves leadership and teacher professional learning in mathematics. I joined MAV Council in 2018 and am currently Vice President of MAV. So after all of that, let's get started. And we're going to start with Swada. And she's going to be talking about her experiences of changing differentiation practices in her school. So thanks, Swada. Waiting on Swada.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry about that technical glitch. Hello, I'm Swada. I'm one of the learning specialists at Turak Primary School, and I suppose today I just wanted to share my or our journey at Turak Primary School in terms of how we are supporting our teachers to build capacity of differentiation through data literacy. So at our school, I suppose the journey, we're always continuously on an improvement journey, but in 2019, the school began the journey with the MAV Collaborative, because the school was predominantly using the practice of ability-based grouping or streaming across F to 6 in the areas of mathematics, with, I suppose, a little emphasis on problem solving or embedding the proficiencies of mathematics. The school was classified as a high-performing school in terms of student results based on NAPLAN and teacher judgment. However, we were not seeing the growth expected from year 3 to year 5 and then across to year 7. In 2019, a maths action team was formed to audit teacher practice, planning and assessment. The team also began to trial open-ended learning tasks with enabling and extending prompts with the support of a maths consultant and then the support of 2 maths learning specialists in the school. The practice led to the development of a scaffold for students that was consistent from F to 6, and those lessons were very much differentiated. So we looked at making sure those lessons had enabling and extending prompts and would engage the whole class. And then I suppose the blessing in disguise was COVID in 2020. During the transformation to remote learning, teachers had to transform from ability-based groupings to having to teach their own class. And also our key improvement strategy for 2020 was also transformed into looking at differentiation within our own class as opposed to ability groupings. Within this, as a leadership team, we had to transform our professional learning structure to support staff to assess, analyse data and make informed decisions about teaching and learning practices, particularly in the area of mathematics. Learning specialists attended each planning session to support the work on data analysis, whether it was formative or summative data. We really had to support our staff to develop their capacity to plan effective instruction to meet the needs of the students, the class, and also the cohort. We had to move from teachers making inferences about their students' skills and knowledge to making really informed decisions using formative and summative data. So I suppose our journey to become data literate was really the focus at our school in 2020. Now with those changes, our teachers predominantly in the F to 2 area were far more receptive to these changes and were able to begin their transformation, really building their knowledge and making adjustments to how lessons and sequences were structured, really honing in, what do the children need to know, and what is that continuum looking like for them in their classrooms. Through coaching, those F2 teachers have really adapted to more of a problem-solving approach, embedding the notion of differentiation to continuously move students through the continuum of learning. So we're moving away from, I'm a grade 2 teacher, so I'm teaching Vic Creek 2, or I've got this group of students, they're operating at 2.5, and that's the area that I'm working in. So that was a fantastic move from our F2 teachers. Although the middle school were again somewhat reluctant to see the benefits of change, and it wasn't really until we administered some NAPLAN simulated assessments to measure the growth between 2019 and 2020 to identify students' growth, I suppose, identify their strengths and weaknesses, that they finally began to question the methodology behind their teaching practices. As the data showed, only 13% of that cohort had made growth between year 3 NAPLAN, which is sort of May to September of year 4. This was a light bulb moment for the teachers in the team to begin the conversations around the how and the why. The powerfulness of them viewing it as them wanting to drive the change rather than leadership imposing change was critical to ensure the buy-in and less resistance to change. So once again, the learning specialists were there to support the process through targeted questioning and provocations to elicit those respectful but challenging conversations around how we teach mathematics. A considerable amount of time was then devoted through the PLC model to develop the teacher's capacity to collect, unpack, analyse data for the purpose, and then use data to begin to plan relevant, rich learning sequences that met the needs of the students. We are certainly still at the very early stages of our journey in developing robust teaching and learning sequences that meet the needs of each student. But through this, the staff have been able to identify their strengths and their weaknesses and are developing confidence to seek support from others to further develop their capacity to be data literate and confident in teaching mathematics, regardless of the content area or the Vic Creek or the stage in the learning continuum that the children in front of them are sitting at.
I guess this has been like a really challenging time for some of the teachers in the school, moving from this idea of streaming to differentiated teaching, and there's a whole lot of new practices. What do you think's been the most challenging thing for the teachers in your school?
I suppose when we reflect back, teachers being able to plan a task and then really looking at those enabling and extending prompts. What would a student need for those enabling prompts to enable access to this concept, and what would those extending prompts be for those students who are working above the expected? So through work in our PLC and with our learning specialist, in a collaborative manner, we work tirelessly looking at the tasks and really unpacking what are we predicting the students to show, or what questions are we going to ask the students during the lesson. So spending a lot of that collaboration or collaborative time to unpack each one of those tasks that we're putting to the students. So, that team approach, and I suppose going from, planning 25 lessons to 5 fantastic lessons, changing that mindset of staff, but in a really supportive approach. And the other thing is, that teachers are now identifying and coming and asking for support. I need support with this. So they're actually identifying, and I suppose overcoming their maths anxieties. As we talk with the students about their maths anxieties, we're also beginning those conversations with our staff, and how do we build the capacity of our staff to overcome some of those maths anxieties.
Great, thanks, Swada. We'll move to Mark now, and Mark's going to share about how his school manages the challenges of meeting the needs of a wide range of students. So thanks, Mark. We'll hand over to you now and you should be able to start sharing your slides as well.
There you go, cool, okay. My school, Lumen Christie, we're about years down the track from SWATA, I was really talking. It sounded like I was out journey 3 or 4, and we're at a stage where we are teaching mathematics in a mini group setting. Also got flexible targeted and interventions organised through both analysis and students. When we get planning, we start sessions with looking at our data from the year. That includes the screen, so like that. But it's using that or looking at conceptions, starting points, and the next step, opportunities for during pre-units.
I think we might, sorry, I think we might pause there, Mark. I think we're having a bit of trouble hearing you. So what we might do is just see if you can come back on, and we might just skip and come back to you in a moment. One of the things that Mark is going to be talking about is where his school's at, which, as he said, is a few years down the track from where SWATA is, and what their school's experience has been of planning this. What we might do is just skip Mark and we'll come back to him, and we might just go on to my section perhaps, and then we'll come back to Mark once the technology's cooperating with what we need. So what I'm going to start with is a discussion about the idea that, you know, there's such a wide range of knowledge and experience and skills of the students in our classrooms. And that's in any classroom. So we know that there's a lot of evidence that shows that there's at least a 5-year range in any classroom. And you can see here that Jeff Masters has stated that the most advanced 10% of students are about 5 to 6 years ahead of the least advanced students within any school year. And this creates a challenge for teachers in finding out how to plan and teach and meet the needs of those students. And one of my roles in working with pre-service teachers is at Melbourne, we use a particular model that we talk about, and we talk about this clinical teaching cycle. With the clinical teaching cycle or the clinical approach to teaching, there's some underlying foundations that we talk about and that we say are really important to understand before we start implementing the clinical approach to teaching. And one of those first things that is so important is the teacher knowledge and pedagogical skills. So this is really about knowing the content, knowing how kids learn, what are the key developmental stages, what can we target, how do children learn this, what might some of the common misconceptions be? So to really understand the content and how to teach the content. And that's a really key important part, particularly in mathematics. We really need to know that key information. The second aspect of this is that we see learning as an acquisition model. We see that kids learn from what they already know. They're constantly building on their knowledge. They're trying to make connections. And in maths, this is something we really want to encourage, that kids are able to develop knowledge that is rich in relationships, that they can make connections between different aspects of mathematics, that they can use problem-solving skills in different ways, and that they can see the connections between different areas of mathematics. So this acquisition point of view means that we're not seeing learning as a deficit model. We're not focusing on what children don't know. So we're not looking at, oh, they don't know this, they don't know that. We're looking at what do they know and what can we build on from that. The next part is that we see learning as assessment-based. As SWATA mentioned, we really want evidence, not inference. So what are children making or saying or doing or writing? We're not just focused on those big tests, but all the assessment that teachers do all the time, when they listen to kids, when they talk to kids, when they ask questions. And we're looking at assessment beyond pen and paper, things like interviews that will give us a really rich view of what children understand. And we use that evidence to extend the prior knowledge of children, to know and to build on what they already know. And the last aspect is that idea of PLCs. And again, SWATA mentioned that this was something that her school was starting to use. And PLCs are such a rich opportunity for teacher development, where teachers are talking to each other, where teachers are sharing the assessment of their students, where teachers are planning together, where teachers are thinking about what are the possible answers that children might come up with? What are the possible strategies that they might use? What are the possible stages of learning? All of these things can be discussed in PLCs to make sure that that planning is broad and it reflects that range and diversity within the classroom. So when we have all of this behind us, we can then start looking at the clinical teaching cycle. And this clinical teaching cycle goes through various stages. And you can see on this slide here what those stages are. So the first stage is, what is the learner ready to learn and what evidence supports this? And so this is where we use that assessment data. We might be thinking about a child who we might be starting to do some multiplicative thinking in the classroom. So are children doing things like counting by ones to add collections? Are they skip counting? Are they able to use multiples? These are all the things that we're thinking at to see what is the diverse range within the classroom and what evidence do we have that indicates this. The second step on it is, what are the possible evidence-based interventions? So what are the kind of things that we could do? And this might mean looking at some research in the PLC. This might mean collecting resources. This is about not just saying, oh, we could do this worksheet, but why would we choose this worksheet? Or why would we choose this activity? Or why would we choose this game? So looking at what the possibilities are, which leads us to the next step, which is, what is the preferred strategy? What are we going to do to make sure we're resourcing and implementing this strategy correctly? So we're really thinking about making an informed decision about what we want to do. And we're thinking about perhaps staffing this. We might be thinking about physical resources like manipulatives that we might be using. Again, we might be thinking about games or discussions or the model of how we're going to implement this in the classroom. But that leads us to the next question. And the next question is, what is the expected impact on the learning and how will this be evaluated? So here is where we start to think, well, if we're doing this activity, what might some of those strategies be that we would expect to see the children using? What might some of the solutions be? What might some of the answers be? What might some of those drawings be that kids would use to show their thinking? So that we can predict, with our content knowledge, with our research that we've done, we can predict what some of those answers might be. And when we see children doing this, we are able then to see what the stage of learning they're at or what they might need to be doing to develop that. One of the things that we'll be then using is discussion and questioning in the classroom to promote thinking, to get kids to discuss what they've done, to reason, to problem solve, and to think about why they have chosen the method they have, how they have built on that, and what might they be able to do to extend that thinking. So we're getting kids to reflect on their work at the same time as this. The final step is finding out, well, what actually happened? What did we find out after we listened to the children? And what does this new evidence tell us now about where their learning is? And then the cycle starts again. And what you will have seen from what Swada said, and I'm sure Mark's going to say lots of those things when we go back to him, that all of these aspects, they might be called different things. They might not be called the clinical approach to teaching in their schools, but what you can see are the elements of this. You can see that idea of promoting content knowledge, about teachers becoming data literate so they can make a really informed decision about where that student is at and what kind of approaches they will use to continue to develop the learning of that student. And so this is that clinical approach to teaching. I think perhaps some people might be saying, well, what does this actually look like? And so what this looks like is, for example, an activity that you might do. And you might be doing something to do with area and proportional thinking. And here's an activity that says, Tiny Ted has a big brother that's exactly twice as big as he is. Draw a big brother for Tiny Ted that's exactly twice as big as Tiny Ted. Now, this is an activity that we do with our pre-service teachers. And when we do this activity every year, it's one of the first activities that we do that relates to proportional thinking and area. And we know we're going to come back to this later on. So what we do is we start off with this activity, and usually we are looking for particular strategies that people use, or we're looking for particular drawings that they might do. So some of those strategies that we expect to see are, we're going to see a variety. We know we're going to get different possibilities. We see some students drawing a rectangular outline. Some students get stuck and they don't know where to start, and that's often a suggestion that we make. We say, well, why don't you look at the outline and see if you can make an outline that's twice as big, because that might help. Or grid lines. Some students use grid lines, some don't. These are the kinds of things that we know students use that help them, and we can prompt them as well. We've got tools that they might want to use, maybe a ruler or some other kind of benchmark that they can compare against. Some of them will actually use measurement. And some of them, these are adults, will use ratio and proportion to help solve this problem. So some of the solutions that we might see, you can see here. So we have the most common solution that most of them do, where they make tiny TED 4 times as big. So they double it in each direction, in each dimension. The next one is where they make it twice as big, where they extend one dimension, but we get this really long, thin teddy that is not proportionally the same. Or they extend it widthwise as well, and the same thing, that we get a teddy that's twice the size, but it's not proportionally the same. Then we have a couple of other solutions where perhaps they guess and they do things like, you know, when you have A4 paper and you turn it and double it, it becomes A3 paper. That's kind of that solution where you can see that next teddy where it looks almost twice as big, and it is twice as big, but it's not proportionally the same. And then you have the final one where you have the teddy that is proportionally the same. It's twice as big and it's been increased by the correct ratio. This is the range that we expect to see. But the best thing about this activity is when we start discussing it after they've drawn it. And all of these people suddenly realize, oh, I've made it 4 times as big. I just didn't even think of that. And so these kind of comments that we get help us to evaluate where they're at in terms of their content knowledge. We also know that there are some people that are still struggling with it. And it's so rewarding to see in the following weeks when we have other activities that build on this, where they suddenly go, oh, I get it now. Or, oh, this is like when we did the Teddy activity. And you say, yes, yes, this is exactly like that. So we can see that these ideas develop through various activities, but it's not just the doing of the activity, it's the discussion that we have afterwards and the connections that we make between the activities that make a difference. All right, we might head back to Mark and see if Mark is ready now. How are you going there, Mark? Is Mark able to join us?
I just lost on screen. My wife's having performance anxiety, I think. Can we hear?
Great. So do you want to start by sharing your slides, Mark?
Yep, just do that now. Are they up?
Yes, they're great.
No. Thanks for that. Yeah, even some things there that Kate was talking about is a lot of things that we've gone through in planning of what we're currently doing. So again, yes, just getting back. So data-based planning, differentiations for their summative, but what's more important is the formative data. That's the planned ones. And we use that throughout the units work where we track and follow the targeted opportunity. We, all the way through our lessons, we are reporting and responding to the progress that teachers are making with the students and make adjustments, grouping and focus as well.
I think we've lost Mark again.
I think I'm going.
Yeah. Yeah, Mark, why don't you have a go at just talking instead of sharing your screen, because perhaps that might help a little bit.
All right, I'll do that. Could be that. I'll just take that.
Okay.
Am I on?
Yep, you're good.
Yep. No, all right. Okay. So we over the last few, we've a couple of projects and programs for our different levels. So grades prep the 2, 3s are doing a little. We're part of a program called PAS. Just Kate introduction to me a minute. Would be the
I think we're going
works for the modelling.
Sorry, I think we're going to have to stop again because you're
That's
breaking up a lot.
Problem.
I might do a quick summary of some of the things that Mark was going to talk about. So at his school, they use a lot of different kind of differentiation. So they have one program that they have called PASMAP. They also use the the learning assessment frameworks as well at his school for when they're looking at grade 3, 4 for multiplicative thinking. And they are grouping a lot of their kids in really different ways. So they have regular regrouping of students. So they'll have students working in one group based on one topic, and then they'll all move around to different groups based on a different topic. And so the groups are constantly changing. But a really interesting thing that Mark's school has done is they've got students' student voice reflected in what they're doing. So they'll often ask the students to think about what group they need to go into. And it's not about what group they want to go into, but what group they need to go into based on the data that they have and based on the students' understanding of their own progression. So this is quite interesting. And I did ask Mark, what happens when perhaps a student wants to go to a group and they're not ready for it, or just wants to stay in a group with their friends? And he said that the kids are really quite responsible in terms of this, and that they really see this as what's valuable to them in terms of learning and what's helpful to them. What we might do now is skip on to Michelle, and we'll try again. Perhaps Mark might try maybe coming back out and coming back in, or perhaps moving spaces, and we'll see if we can get his Wi-Fi working again. But in the meantime, we'll skip to Michelle.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm very privileged to work with many teachers in schools. I work in maths intervention with teachers and with pre-service and master's students and leaders of mathematics. Differentiation is a topic that almost always comes up. It doesn't seem to matter what context I'm working in. And there's little doubt that one of the greatest challenges for maths teachers is how to adjust the pace, diversify instruction, and modify the curriculum to address all the students' learning needs in the classroom. So pre-service teachers in their third year of university tell me that in their placement schools, achievement grouping is common practice. I'm almost certain that when they return to class after their school placement, that we will be having this discussion around ability grouping. It's really hard to know just how prevalent achievement grouping practices are here in Australia, but what we do know is that grouping of students is a highly used and accepted practice for learning maths, but it's certainly not a strategy that is supported by research. In fact, the opposite is true. I haven't met a teacher in a school who isn't aware of the negative impact that ability grouping has on children's views of themselves as a mathematics learner. I've had the opportunity to research this space a little, and I can tell you that children and their parents tend to be quite discontented about their achievement grouping placement, especially those that are not in the highest achievement group. So you have parents asking what they can do to support their children to be accepted into that highest achievement group. And then there's children and parents who tell me that after consistently being allocated to that lowest group, their child has lost belief in their own ability to learn maths. And often this impacts on their motivation to even try. So to make matters worse, we also know that grouping by achievement means that children will not be able to continue maths into secondary school because they will not know what they need to know to further their studies in mathematics, and this then impacts their career path once they leave school. But despite all of this, I am told over and over again that achievement grouping helps narrow the range of capabilities of students for whom the teacher needs to cater. To quote Doug and Barbara Clark over a decade ago, surely time's up for ability grouping. Given the bad publicity of achievement grouping, you'd think we'd found a way to better differentiate by now. And the truth is we actually have. But there are a few things sitting as obstacles in our way. I've come to the very real conclusion that the decision to organise children into achievement groups for maths comes down to what you believe about how the subject is taught and learnt. Firstly, a commitment towards quality education and educational equity for all students centres on the belief that all children can learn maths. But many believe that mathematics ability is just good fortune. You either possess the talent and intelligence to do maths or you just don't. And this belief is extremely common amongst teachers and parents. Fixed ability thinking or mindset is so deep-seated that even when children are not grouped for learning, there's evidence that teachers believe that students have a predetermined ceiling of achievement and a finite capacity to do and learn maths. I facilitate both the GRIN and the EMU programs for Monash. And if there's one common theme that's enormously important, it is that teachers need to see all kids as capable learners of maths. It's about providing the opportunity for them to learn and providing them with the environment that enables them to learn. So in mathematics, there's certainly no evidence to say that achievement grouping is the way to proceed. So mixed grouping is the way that's going to be best to enable all students to learn mathematics. And if we wish to develop ways of grouping kids that will benefit them, we need to support teachers to develop skills in teaching mixed ability groups. So here I'm drawing on the work of Stein and colleagues who explored one approach which is now quite common throughout the literature. It's the launch, explore and discuss lesson structure. And it involves launching a task, exploring a task and discussing a task and the solutions and strategies that children use. It's in the explore section where the differentiation of the task really takes place. The children are offered the opportunity to get an enabling prompt if they'd like to. It's offered to those who would like a hint as to where to start. Enabling prompts help them get into the mathematics, think through the maths, and then get back to the main problem. It's really like a detour pathway to get back to the main focus of the lesson. So we don't differentiate the learning intention, we differentiate the way the children access the problem. And in terms of explicit teaching, the explicit teaching happens at the end of the lesson, not during the discussion phase, but not at the beginning. We don't model how to do the task for kids. Let me show you how this works. I'd like to now give a shout out to James Bastow, who I've been working with on the Bastow 307 numeracy suite, leading differentiation of mathematics. So following along with the theme that Kate started on proportional reasoning, this task comes from his collection and it's a hit with kids. So let's begin with the launch. Anyone remember this scene in Despicable Me? In this scene, Victor carelessly shrinks several items in the bathroom, including the toilet. The scene ends with Victor on his knees talking to the tiny toilet in a patronising tone. Oh, look at you, a little tiny toilet for a little tiny baby. The toilet lid is then blown off and sprays Victor in the face. He responds with, oh, curse you, tiny toilet. While I don't have time to do this here and play it for you, I definitely recommend you play the scene for the kids. So now to the task. How much smaller is the tiny toilet than the regular toilet? How powerful is the shrink ray? I'd like you to think for a moment about how children might solve the problem. Maybe you'll write down a few ideas in front of you. I'm sure if I scanned a virtual space here, I'd find a range of ways that you think children may solve this problem, and we'd be able to sequence these from the least to the sophisticated solutions. So you can imagine that if I'm sitting with 5 other teachers together in a collaborative learning team, we'd definitely come up with a range of anticipated solutions. Using the least sophisticated solution, I can come up with an enabling prompt, one which would help children begin. So I'm sure you too could come up with a few enabling prompts yourself. But what if I suggested to you using a ruler or using a measuring tape to measure how tall a real toilet actually is? This would help students to begin, I think. And then an extending prompt that allows students to apply their understanding of proportional reasoning to other objects. Can you see how these prompts allow all students to engage with the same problem and engage in the discussion and the review of the task? This approach is in contrast to the approach in achievement groups, where students in different groups pursue different learning goals and possibly even focus on different mathematical content. The purpose of prompts is to optimise the level of challenge without undermining the primary learning objective. The idea is that all kids can work towards the same learning objective at different levels of depth. And this is so different from grouping children and having them all do different tasks. If you'd like to explore this task further, please access the URL at the bottom of the screen. So we need to definitely keep talking about this issue and the tension across schools with teachers and with parents. And of course, our challenge is how do we support all teachers, acknowledging that there's variability in teacher content knowledge and confidence when it comes to teaching maths. So perhaps first and foremost, we need to convince teachers that achievement grouping students in mathematics classrooms isn't the answer, and it's likely to do more harm than good. And the next step is to integrate productive, inclusive pedagogies into everyday teaching and the learning of maths.
Michelle, I can see you've got some resources there. Do you want to just share those? Because I think that they'd be really helpful for teachers to know, where they can get some good resources if they're thinking of implementing some of these strategies and these activities to differentiate in their classroom.
Sure, so there's many resources that make for a good launch for a challenging task or an investigation of sorts. And I'd certainly suggest that you consider using a narrative or a game, placing a mathematical lens over the context, and writing your own challenging tasks, including prompts. But here I've included some excellent resources that I'd recommend if you're looking for some high quality challenging tasks. And you'll notice that Peter Sullivan is the author of a couple of these books. So Peter Sullivan, together with his colleagues, have been at the forefront of the types of differentiated approaches and pedagogical actions that I've spoken about today. So it's my absolute pleasure to now hand over to him.
I might just jump in there. And before we switch to Peter, which we're all looking forward to, I think we might just switch back to Mark and see if we've got Mark available. And perhaps if it works better for Mark, if he turns his camera off, if it's not working, and just talks without his camera on, that might work as well. Otherwise, we can just go for it. Thanks, Mark.
How's that? Can we hear me?
Yep, that sounds good.
No worries. I'll just keep everything off except for my voice. We'll see how we go. Yeah, it's funny because every time someone comes on and off, it's things that it's what we've been sort of talking about at school over the years, and a lot of those resources Michelle's shown are part and parcel of what we use as well. I suppose just because I've run out a bit of time now, I'm just going to focus on two things. Our Prep 3 program of the PASMAP, as you talked about, it's based around an idea of a model of modelling, representing, visualising and generalising, and then there's the sustaining. And the actual model itself drives the actual differentiation in the student task choice, because it actually is based on the data, because we find out which children are ready for different levels of those parts of the model. So some kids might actually need to have modelling and representing happening early on, but we're still doing the same task. It's just that they need to have more modelling and representing in it. But then other kids, based on the data, we see that they have moved on further with their understanding, so that they're more into the visualising and generalising, which we want all people to get to, because that's where they actually start making sense of what they're doing. And again, this is all based on the same task that we work with. And then there might be some children who are ready to do some sustaining tasks, which I suppose would be like the extending prompts, where they can go a little bit further. But the key to the pedagogical structure of the PASA program or PASMAP program is that it is very much based on what the students share with each other. And that's why it's important that they are in mixed groups, because ability groups where kids can't share much because they haven't picked up what they understand yet, it doesn't make the program work. So we basically have the teachers asking children to share strategies that they've seen that are effective. And then we ask the kids, what do you see that's different or the same with what you're doing? Can you explain back or have a go at what that child has done? And then we give them a go and they have some think time and they do the work together and they come back and we see if they've made progress. So the whole idea is that we really are getting them to be active in the learning with each other and not just be listening to teachers telling them what to do. The students are part of the teaching in itself, and we actually can track what they're doing because we can actually see what they're doing. And then it also frees us up with children who are able to be doing some more independent tasks and even helping other children who might be ready to do that next. in the next step, then the teachers are freed up a bit more to work with maybe some small targeted groups, just to give a bit more individualised support to the children who are still at that modelling representing stage. And then I suppose overall, our overarching program of what we've done over the last few years is, I suppose it's called the response to intervention model, which on Hattie's list of effect sizes, it has a good effect size of 1.09, which is something that we want to think about. Now, this model basically works on 3 tiers. The first tier is whole class instruction. And at this level, we basically have all the children working together in mixed groups on a curriculum standing but challenging task. And we set it up so they've all got opportunities to work together, share their strategies and understandings with each other. Teachers, including their extra staff, which we have. I take part in some of the lessons, and we also have a 5th teacher as part of our staffing that gives us more opportunities to spread the kids around a little bit and have more support happening. They'll track the students during this sharing time, during this mixed ability time, and potentially require support. They look for students who are potentially requiring more support, and that's based on what we've already seen from the data, and we're looking for their individual understanding. Alternatively, sometimes what happens is that students have access to more challenging tasks or extending prompts beyond the original task that they can then just choose to work with in an area with another teacher, but anyone can join that group when they're ready to go. It's their choice how far they want to go, but it's not ability group, it's student choice, and it's collaborative. And sometimes there's tiered level versions of the same task, which provide for student choice and targeted practice at current accessible levels. So it might be if they're doing some kind of shopping thing, we just change the numbers, the different levels of numbers, and we just give them opportunities to do exactly the same task, but it's just at the point of need, what is the actual maths that they can handle, what numbers can they handle. And then at tier 2 level is where we have our targeted teaching groups. So after a few days of just working together, we would actually identify specific needs based on misconceptions and gaps, and then we actually plan for targeted teaching groups. Now, these might be a mix of whole sessions, where it might be 1 day a week, or it might be just a 15-minute, 30-minute breakout session, just to teach a gap in the learning that students were not getting sufficient support in the mixed ability session with their fellow students. And then once we just give them a little bit of support, it might be a strategy that we want them to work with more effectively and efficiently. Then they just return back to the main group and the kids that they're working with and continue on the tasks, and then they can share what they've learned as well. And sometimes they can actually bring in more ideas of what to do because they've now got more confidence. And then the students actively make their own decisions along with the teacher consultation to move between the groups, as Kate was saying, that address different needs. So it just might be, there might be the kid who's like considered the highest in the grade, but there's one gap that kid has. He goes over and works with Mr. Bunworth, and because Mr. Bunworth's just showing something that child hasn't been able to pick up yet, and then straight back to work, and then he might be doing extension activities for the rest of the week, but it's just that one thing. So the important thing is we don't have teachers being always in charge of the same things. We don't think Mr. Gleason's in charge of the smart kids and Mrs. Kelly's in charge of the kids that are always struggling. It's just you go to that group because they're going to show you something that we've found out from you doing your work that you haven't quite picked up yet. The kids haven't helped you enough of, and we just give them that opportunity. So they're not grouped in a particular level. They're just grouped at the maths that they need. And then we have the third tier, which is the intensive teaching, because there are certain students that are identified through their ILPs or the NCCD data, where that we know that they've got specific learning needs. They might be 18 months behind. So we will use teaching staff to support those kids with developing more of a one-on-one approach or in very small groups to work on things that they are unable to do. But we'll always give them the opportunity to go back into the main task and just see if they can apply what they've learned to that task. Now, it might be slightly tailed back a bit with an enabling prompt, but it's still the opportunity that everyone is working on the same kind of task. So I suppose that's where we're at. It's not a perfect model yet. We're still working on it. We're like SWATA's teams where we're learning from the experience, and sometimes it's let down a little bit by not having the right data at the right time. But generally, the teachers do a great job with it, and they understand the importance of letting the kids work together and learn from each other, but also having that opportunity for targeted teaching where the kids just know that they need something to learn. So that's why they go to that group. They're not getting labelled as they're always in that group because they're just going to find out something and then they come back into the main task.
We've had a question that's come up in the chat. When students select the right space to go to for differentiated teaching groups, is it just the act of the student agency that changes the outcome? What do you think?
I think it's part of us. We've got to plan for the right way of teaching it. But the teachers, but the students themselves, they actually, because we use a lot of visible learning, so they actually know what's important about going to that group. They know what specifically is happening there. So kids will move into a group because they want to go to the next level, or they'll move into a group because they realise that they need to find out something, that they need to learn something that they haven't quite got their head around yet. So the students themselves are making that action. I mean, I think that's really important because they're starting to track themselves and say, if I want to succeed at this, I'm going to come over to this little session here and learn something, and then I'll go back and I'll try it out. And then they can always talk to each other or go back and see the teacher again and say, I still need a little bit more. And we also have access to videos that they can watch as well in their own time, just to double check what they're doing.
Great, thanks, Mark. That's really interesting to hear about. What we might do is move to Peter now. So we're all eager to hear. So I'll hand over to Peter.
Okay, thanks, Kate. Now I don't have a slideshow. I'm just going to talk. There's one of the sayings about education is that in Latin it's si portum nescus nullum ventum secundus est. And what it says is, if you don't know what harbour you're going to, then no wind is a good wind. And so my consideration of this issue, which obviously is an important issue, the fact there's a panel at the MAV virtual conference, it's there, and I thank whoever invited me to be part of it. So thank you for that. Now, there's two major assumptions that I want to talk about. Now, the first assumption is that education is about developing everyone to their maximum potential, and that's obviously including in mathematics. Now, if you don't agree with that assumption, and by the way, that assumption doesn't necessarily apply in all countries at all stages of development. Maybe it didn't apply in Australia 100 years ago. But at the moment, I think that the concept of developing an inclusive society says that we have to have people develop to their maximum potential. And so the issue then is, okay, well, how do we do that? Like, if you don't believe that assumption, well, then you need to argue why you shouldn't be heading towards that. Now, the first thing about developing everyone to the maximum potential, and this isn't an assumption, this is just a statement of logic, is that we can't run the curriculum teaching different content and different subtopics to different kids at different times. The whole concept of monitoring their development is going to be ridiculously complex. It requires additional work. So it's fundamental to developing everyone that we have to go through the same program at the time. Now, the issue is, does grouping kids by their achievement, either between classes or within classes, is it a good thing or a bad thing? Now, who knows the answer to that question? Obviously, a lot of schools think it's a good thing, and that's why they teach it like that. I see a lot of classes where teachers have achievement groups within the class, and they work with those intensively. But my experience of watching those is the other kids seem to be mucking around and not utilising their time. But my fundamental point is this, is that we have to say this question: are the students in the high achievement groups advantaged? Are they developed to the maximum potential by the grouping practice? And now, by the way, these questions apply whether you're actually going to group the kids by their achievement or have heterogeneous groups. And so are the kids in the top group advantaged? Are the kids in the middle group advantaged or developed to their maximum potential? Are students in the low group advantaged by being developed to the maximum potential? Now, I like Michelle's comment about the low group actually going worse. I was once doing a presentation to a group of teachers, and I was sort of making the point about where you need to consider these issues. And the teacher says, well, I have a lot of success with my low group. I call them the maggots group. And I was a little bit shocked because I thought it was a slightly judgmental term. And now it turned out she actually said meerkats. But the point is, the kids think they're in the maggots group. And so it actually has a thing. Anyway, the point I'm trying to make now is this, that we have in schools, you have the data that can help you to work out whether your structure is helping kids reach their maximum potential. And not just some kids, but all of the kids. So whether you use NAPLAN data, whether you use PatMath, whether you use even essential assessments, or whatever it is you use, any normed type of data is going to help you to answer the question. And so you can look at the kids. Okay, if you have high, middle, and low groups, or even if you have heterogeneous groups, you still need to analyse the data to see whether your structure is actually serving the needs of every kid. And it then becomes important. Now, Suada made this point, and Kate made the point about how using data, using evidence for making judgments on which you're going to base your work. Now, in terms of, by the way, the different treating for kids at different topics at different levels, I really loved Kate's example and Michelle's example of tasks, because those are tasks that kids can approach the same task, but in different ways. And that seems to me to be a way of keeping the kids on the same page, but actually addressing their needs. And by the way, that's still going to apply whether you, in fact, you want kids heterogeneously grouped or in other groups. And so the first point about the assumption is, are we developing every kid to the maximum potential? Well, the issue is work it out, find out, use the data that you have in your school. All educational decisions are context specific, so that each school needs to make their own judgment, their own decisions. And so you have the data, use the data and work it out. Okay. My second assumption is this, that every kid, every person is different. And that's different in terms of their prior experience, their aspirations, their expectation, their motivation, their persistence, all sorts of things, whether they're good at measurement and whether they're good at spatial activities, whether they're good at number, every kid is different. And so the idea of dividing the kids up into, let's say, 3 groups, a high group, a middle group, and a low group, and then saying that we're going to treat those groups as though they're all the same, that seems to me to be perfectly ridiculous. So however you teach, you have to treat each kid as an individual and run the lesson so that there's a whole range of experiences can be developed. And so what do we know about kids? Well, now everyone tries to make meaning. It's part of the natural process of being alive. Whenever we see something, we try to make meaning about it. We also know that kids, or the majority of kids, like to learn from each other, from other kids. They like to talk as a way of stimulating their thinking. They like to listen as a way of seeing new perspectives, and so on. The sequential development of, like, the standard one of concrete, pictorial, iconic, or symbolic, it seems to apply to pretty much everyone. Now, some people reach the symbolic earlier than others, but that's because they went through the concrete stage at an earlier stage. And so we know those sorts of things. But the big difference is not ability, it's actually the time that it takes to be able for kids to learn things. And so one of the rules, and this applied, one of the things I liked about what Mark was talking about, is that one of the 10 rules of maths teaching is experience before instruction. It's much more important to give the kids an experience, to have them talk about their experience, to have them relate to each other, and then have the instruction after that, and that's important. Now, there's in PISA 2012, it's a test assessment for 15-year-olds, and it's 500,000 students do the assessment, and it's a NAPLAN style assessment, but the kids also answer attitudinal type questions. And the results of that, and there's a number of studies that have been done from the 2012 one where they used a set of items called cognitive activation. Now, what that means is the kids are the ones do the thinking. They're given, or they have to come up with their own methods of solving problems. They're solving difficult problems. They're talking with each other about the problems and so on. And what it says is that overall, the results say that the more often the teachers use cognitive activation approaches, the more mathematics the students can learn. But there was also a complicated result related to that in terms of this discussion. One is that the high income, they divided the students in high income and low income, in the high quartile and the low quartile. And the high quartile students, they said, prefer cognitive activation instruction, whereas the low quartile students are more likely to have teacher direction as to be important. But they actually use a biblical metaphor to describe the risks of doing this, and they call it the Matthew effect. And by the way, they use that in economic theory quite a lot. But what the Matthew theory is, Matthew 25:29, where the text says, "To them that hath shall be given, to them that hath not, even what they have will be taken away." And what that's saying is that if we don't give the kids in the low group the opportunities to think, the opportunities to learn from each other, the opportunity to apply their own strategies, to be treated like they're all the same, that will actually take from them the key issue that we're trying to get the kids. Obviously, I talked about inclusion, but the other main goal about education is they call it agency, meaning they want the kids to think for themselves. And so, but telling the kids what to do, treating them like they've got to follow a recipe all the time, is not going to advantage those kids. And so the issue, and I think this is the point that Michelle was making, that if the teachers don't know how to teach heterogeneous groups, and by the way, even if you divide the students into whole class streamed groups, you still need to treat the kids as individual. Now, if the teachers don't know how to teach heterogeneous groups, that seems to be a really important place to start. So it's not, if you like, a lack of knowledge that's causing you to make decisions on school structures, but it's actually the data on how the students are going. And so we don't want the decisions on grouping to be made by default. We want the decisions on grouping to be made by what's best for the students, and keeping in mind those two basic assumptions. Assumption number one is, are we developing every single kid to their potential, at least at the primary level? People might subject choice and people follow career paths at secondary level, but at primary level, we want every kid leaving primary school having the maximum chance to maximise their chances at secondary school. But the other issue is that every kid is different, and so we can't treat any group as being as though it's homogeneous. And so all of the pedagogies have to be addressing the needs of individual kids and recognise their individuality. And so once again, I just say thanks to Kate for the opportunity to be part of this discussion, and congratulations on the MAV, by the way, on the courage to go ahead and run the conference virtually. So maybe we'll do this some more in the future. So thank you.
Thanks, Peter. I think one of the things that's really come through is that differentiation is a challenge for all schools. And we can see from the school experiences of both Swarta and Mark that these are things that schools are continuing to work on. They see that there's things that they are trying to do to continually improve opportunities for all students, as Peter talked about, so that all students have the opportunity to not just do maths, but to actually reason and problem solve and go beyond where some of those kids perhaps have just been given simple fluency type tasks in the past. We want them to all have access to some great tasks, but to develop their thinking in mathematics as well. We've had some interesting questions. We don't have a lot of time, but I thought we might just start with this one, and I might flick to Michelle for this question. We've had a question: how do you manage enablers and extenders with students in Prep to 2 who aren't strong readers? And I thought, Michelle, you might be able to answer that one, because I know you've done a lot of work with teachers on this. So what might have been some of your experiences with Prep to 2 teachers using those prompts?
That's a good question. Who actually asked that question?
Fiona. Thanks, Fiona.
Thanks for that question, Fiona. It's a really terrific one. So often I'm going to be suggesting to use some visual prompts. So that might be a number chart. It may be some manipulatives perhaps as well. So we want to, if we can, pop up an enabling prompt that has a visual of sorts. It might, for example, be if I'm asking how many fingers in a room, I might put an enabling prompt with fingers looking like this as an enabling prompt. So nice question. As much as possible, stick in some visual representations.
Thanks, Michelle. We've also had a few questions about could we group according to types of thinking, like concrete, abstract, representational, abstract, that kind of thing. And we've also had people thinking about what about teaching to one point of need in a group. And I think we come back to what Peter was talking about, that use the data. What does the data tell you about those students? And if you are grouping in that way, is it effective? is that working? And if that's working for your school and it's working for all of those students, to make progress, then that's a decision that your school would make. And I don't, what would you say, Peter? Would you, different types of grouping?
Well, sort of the ideal, I think, is to try and find tasks where that type of grouping is not necessary, where some kids are approaching a task, if you like, in one way, and some kids are approaching in a different way. And I think Kate gave the example of multiplicative thinking. And I think she was talking about, well, some kids might just count, you might have a multiplicative question, let's just a simple one, like an array that you have. And some kids might count one by one. Some kids might count by how many rows and do it by repeat addition. Some kids might do it, you know, by using multiplication, multiplicative thinking there. But they're actually approaching the same task, and it didn't matter that they were approaching it in one way, approaching it in another. Like, there's so many times in life that we actually learn from the experience of others. Now, in my case, I have difficulty interpreting visual art, but when someone else explains the visual art, I think, oh, I get it, I can see that. And so, you know, I didn't want to be put into the low achieving visual art group where we talk about, oh, okay, it looks like there's a bit of red. I'm not going to learn much from other people who are like me. I'm going to learn by people who actually know what's going on. And so the point is grouping kids so that treating them like they are the same group is actually high risk. And I think that the potential for kids to learn from each other, given enough time, given the experience beforehand, given the support so that they can engage with things which for them are challenging, then the opportunity to listen to each other and have teacher summaries afterwards seem to be a much more powerful way of engaging kids in their learning.
Thanks, Peter. That's great. We might have to stop there because of time. So I'd like to really thank Swada and Mark and Michelle and Peter for coming along today. And on behalf of MAV, I'd like to thank you for your time today and all the time you put in preparation for this. We're going to take a quick break now. So don't forget to check your virtual delegate satchel and to touch base with our sponsors and exhibits. And the next session will start at 10:25. Thanks, everyone.